Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to our Hanafi fiqh class. We are doing the kitab known as Sunan of Maulana Zafar Ahmad Thanvi rahimahullah. We are dealing with the various chapters relating to Ghusl, and tonight inshallah ta'ala we are starting from page 216 of volume 1, which is this particular chapter that you see in front of you. So let us begin. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Okay, one thing before we begin, if anybody can confirm that the sound is working. Testing 1, 2, 3. Microphone, speaker, okay, seems to be working. So let's carry on. So we are starting tonight, inshallah ta'ala, from page 216, like I said. Babu ma yansi ba'da jasadihi wa lam yaghsilhu. The chapter regarding what a person does if he's made ghusl and he must out washing a certain part, whichever part that may be. What does he do? Now we're starting from hadith number 161. عن عبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله عنه أن رجلا جاء إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فسأله عن رجل يغتسل من الجنابة فيخطي بعض جسده الماء فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يغسل ذلك المكان ثم يصلي. Hazrat Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, he narrates that a man came to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam and asked Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, what is the ruling on a man who makes ghusl from janaba, obviously meaning he's taking a fard ghusl now, and فَيُخْطِئُ بَعْضَ جَسَدِهِ الْمَاء, and the water misses a particular a portion, any portion, be it a person forgetting to rinse his mouth or forgetting to rinse his nose, or maybe he happened to be wearing a shower cap, let's assume it this way, if he's happened to be that way inclined. But you know, whether it's a man or a woman, whoever it may be, at the end of the day, you've made ghusl, and then you look and you're like, oh, here's a dry spot on my arm, which means the water didn't touch here. Oh, yeah, why is my hair here dry? Which means the water touched here, but it didn't touch things of this sort. So now you realize a part of your body. Normally, though, it tends to be a person's, let's put it this way, your mouth or your nose, because you can forget such things. Furthermore, it can also be a case of, let's say, for example, you were making bread in the kitchen. So now you've got some dough on you, and then you've made your ghusl and everything, and then you look, and there's a piece of dough on your arm. And it's like, that dough didn't come from now. It was there when I made the bread, and that was before I went to go make ghusl, which means that this dough remained on me through that entire period, which means it was a preventer from the water touching the skin beneath it. Hence, that part of the body was actually not washed. So in a case like this, what do? He came and he asked Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, what does the person do in such a situation? And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, يَغْسِلُ ذَلِكَ الْمَكَانَ ثُمَّ يُصَلِّي. Simply put, just wash that part, and then you are free to go and make your salah and everything else. Your ghusl will be intact. So you forgot to rinse your mouth, you forgot to rinse your nose, whatever the case. Now you've gone, you've dressed, you everything, you come out, you're about to leave your house already, and you're like, you know what? I didn't rinse my mouth. And you go and you rinse your mouth, and boom, your ghusl is intact. You don't have to say, oh, I forgot to rinse my mouth, and we go back and make another ghusl. You don't have to. You just wash the part that was missed, and that alone is sufficient. So رواه الطبراني في الكبير ورجاله موثقون مجمع الزوائد وقد مر في باب عدم افتراض الترتيب في الوضوء. He says the hadith is reported by Imam al-Tabarani rahimahullah in his Al-Mu'jam al-Kabir, and the narrators are all thiqa, they're all reliable. It's mentioned in Majma' al-Zawaid, this over here, and he says, Maulana Zafar Ahmad Thanvi, he says that we already passed by this in the chapter when we mentioned that it is not farad to have tartib in wudu, in the sense that if you were making wudu and then you forgot to wash your arms and you washed your feet, you came out and then it's like, I forgot to wash my arms. Then you can go back and you wash your arms and your wudu is valid. So the same way that apply there, the same way it will apply in matters of ghusl. So if you forgot to wash a particular portion, you can then wash that portion the minute you remember it, inshallah. Your ghusl, your wudu, all will be valid. Very short chapter. There was no need to really delve into it because it was, in fact, something like you said that we have already touched upon before. Now we're moving on to a new chapter, which is on page 217. It is باب وجوب الغسل من التقاء الختانين ولو لم ينزل. It is the chapter with regards to the fact that it is wajib. In other words, what we're dealing with something that breaks your ghusl here, which is what? That iltiqa'ul khitanain, when the two circumcised parts touch, even if there was no emission of fluid, the ghusl breaks. Touch, meaning what? We will explain that shortly, inshallah. But let's first read the hadith. So hadith number 162 عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا جلس بين شعبها الأربع ثم جهدها فقد وجب الغسل وفي حديث مطر وإن لم ينزل رواه مسلم. So Hazrat Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu narrates that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, when a man sits between the four limbs of a woman, ثم جهدها, and then, in other words, they sleep together, so to speak, فقد وجب الغسل, then ghusl becomes wajib, meaning wajib on him and wajib on her. وفي حديث مطر, in another narration it's mentioned, وإن لم ينزل, even if there wasn't, it was like they slept together but he didn't release any fluid and neither did she. So therefore, even in a case like that, ghusl becomes wajib. So before we go further, okay, let me read the next one and then explain it, which is hadith number 163. وله أيضا عن عائشة رضي الله عنها مرفوعا إذا جلس بين شعبها الأربع ومس الختان فقد وجب الغسل. Also another narration from Hazrat Aisha رضي الله عنها مرفوعا, meaning she narrated from Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who said that when a man sits between a woman's four limbs and ومس الختان, when his circumcised part touches her circumcised part, then ghusl becomes obligatory. So I mentioned in the beginning that touching, I would explain. So the hadith mentions iltiqa, the meeting, mas, which means touching, all words of this nature. Does it literally mean touch? The answer is no. There's ijma' on the fact that if the two parts just touched, there's no ghusl involved. Ijma' on that point. Absolute consensus. So what is being meant? It is like Allah uses in the Quran, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ, or you touch women, which is a kinaya form. It's an ambiguous form. Allah uses such terminology which is out of modesty and decency, to put it this way. Do not say, you go and you shoot your shot and, you to use terms that people use in today's time. To be like shameless in their speech. So Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam was never this way. Therefore, Allah uses awla mastumun nisa, you touch women. And we say as Ahnaf, it does not mean physically touching. It refers to husband and wife sleeping together. So Allah uses that word to avoid speaking crude language. In a like manner, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam uses words like this here to avoid using crude language. So that's what it is. So the word mentions touch, but it means actually insert. So when the insertion or penetration, whatever term you want to use, takes place, then ghusl becomes a wajib. Whether it was like we spoke here, whether he releases any fluid or not, it does not matter. The mere insertion is what breaks the ghusl. Now, why was there a need to mention this in the first place? The reason is because there were other narrations prior to this which were abrogated. Wherein, for example, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Al-ma'u min al-ma'," that water is from water. If you were to verbatimly translate it without knowing what you are saying, but what it meant was that when you release your fluid, then you need water, which is ghusl. In other words, when you release your fluid, you need to wash yourself with water. That's what al-ma'u min al-ma' meant. So therefore, at that period, that time, it was understood that only if you release fluid does your ghusl break. But this hadith of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam came to clarify things, to say that وَإِلَّمْ يَنْزِلْ, and even if just the penetration takes place, that alone is sufficient. Your ghusl is broken. You now need to go make a fresh ghusl, and yeah. Very good question that was asked over here. What is the meaning of both male and female part have circumcision? It was actually something I was planning on mentioning in any case. So it's a good thing that you asked it anyway. So let me just mention one thing over here. One is that circumcision, as in the part that the man is circumcised, everybody understands. But circumcision for a woman is also something which is accepted within the Sharia. It is different to what the kuffar. You see, the thing is that the kuffar, they demonize certain things. And then because of the way that they demonize things, people's mindsets are dragged along that way. So circumcision was like, what is this that you're talking about? In recent years, the kuffar world themselves, they've been full on drives for male circumcision, because they found that it helps in preventing AIDS, it helps with this, it helps with that, all things of the sort. So even the kuffar are doing circumcision, even though the Sharia had told us to do circumcision from the time of Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam already. So the thing is, our Deen put it there. It's only that the kuffar world themselves have been doing it, that it became normalized in society. Otherwise, had the kuffar demonized it, you would have found that there would have been many people who call themselves Muslim that would not have gotten circumcised. Now, the same actually happens now. On the flip side of the coin, female circumcision is something which has existed all the years too. But now the kuffar came and they gave it a new name. They call it female genital mutilation. FGM for short. And FGM is like, it's like, it's like the way they demonize it. It's like some village woman will take a bottle and break it there, and cut you just like that. And then, the horror stories attached to it. And thus it goes in the minds of people, men and women, that, don't talk such things. It's like, it's like that. It's due to the demonization process of the kuffar. And thus, things that are existing within our deen, if you'll find even people who have, and let's put it this way, a Deeni background, and they're like, it's squeamish, let's not go there, that, and things of that sort. The point being that Islam has obligated it in the case of a man, and it is something which is good in the case of a woman. It hasn't been put as being wajib in that sense. Even though you'll have difference of opinion amongst the ulama, but long story short, everyone is unanimous in the fact that there exists circumcision both for men and women. And it was the norm in the past. It has become more rare in today's time on account of the fact that, like I say, just even bring it up in a conversation and you'll hear how people jump on you. It's like, for example, if you were to Google it, for example, I'm not telling anybody to Google it, you don't even know what will come up. But the point being that if you were to Google it, more than likely you'd end up finding that 90% of the results will be somehow or the other linked with female genital mutilation. And that's how it goes. But for us, we should be following our deen and what the deen has taught us, not what the kafir will. I tell you now, let it go down 20 years down the line, and the scientists, they have a new breakthrough to say that if a woman gets circumcised, it will prevent her from getting COVID. I guarantee you now, if it was said tomorrow by the governments of the world that a woman being circumcised will protect her against COVID, it will enable her to have more children, etc., then the kafir world will push it and the Muslims will run to do it. Then you will find Muslims quoting hadith and this and that to justify it, because it's like, hey, we actually started it. In reality, you ran for it only because the kuffar ran for it. So, the sad part is that many Muslims today, they base their likes and dislikes and what they accept and things based on what the kuffar world wants. So if the kafir world wants something, it's good. Hence why with cupping, and you have Sanibel Williams and this one here and that Olympic swimmer and things like this here, and they come on a field and people ask, what are those marks? Were they attacked by an octopus or a squid or something? And they're like, no, they got cupped. Oh, and now it's like, oh, everybody, you must get cupped, you must get cupped. Cupping was part of the Deen for 1400 years, but it became, something good, not because the Deen said so, but because the Western doctors now also jumped on the bandwagon to say there's a lot of good, it removes the evil toxins from you. This is not the way that Muslims should be. We should be following the Deen and let the world catch up with it. Rather, people are following the world and throwing the Deen behind their backs. What the world is willing to accept of the Deen, they'll take that along with them. And what the world do not accept of the Deen, they discard it and abandon it and leave it behind. It's a sad state of affairs that we live in. Be that as it may. So the point being that the circumcision for a man, it's something that we all understand and think, so there's no need to delve much into it. But yes, circumcision for a woman also exists. And with regards to now from a fiqh perspective, when the circumcised parts touch, obviously the circumcised part of a woman is on the outside. So that is why I mentioned that if the touching takes place, it doesn't affect the ghusl at all. That's why there is ijma' on that point. Or rather, what is meant by touch is referred to as the insertion, the penetration, whatever term. I try to avoid such overly explicit terms, but just to explain the mas'ala, it refers to the actual insertion. It does not refer to actually touching, because otherwise it would be touching on the outside, and that is not what is being referred to in this hadith. So it means when the man enters the woman, at that point immediately ghusl breaks. All right, and Allah knows best. That was that. Now let's move on to the next hadith. Hadith number. If there are any questions at any point in time, like I always mention, you're always welcome to ask your question. You don't have to wait. There's no limit. No, you can only ask one question or only 5 questions. If you want to ask 50 questions, if you want to ask 49 follow-up questions, it's not a problem at all. Don't feel well. I asked too many. Nobody else is answering. You don't have to worry about any of that. As many questions. If you need something explained 100 times also, I don't mind explaining it 110 times. So you don't have to ever worry about things like that. Yeah, as many questions as you want to ask, you're always welcome to ask. You don't have to wait until the end of the class. Anytime that we're doing something and a question pops up, you can ask away, and inshallah we'll do it as we go along. Anyhow, so we move on to the next narration. Hadith number 164. حدثنا أبو بكر بن أبي شيبة حدثنا أبو معاوية عن حجاج عن عمرو بن شعيب عن أبيه عن جده رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا التقى الختانان وتوارت الحشفة فقد وجب الغسل. رواه ابن ماجه. قلت ورواه الإمام أحمد في مسنده. حدثنا أبو معاوية حدثنا حجاج فذكره وفي كنز العمال وكل ما كان في مسند أحمد فهو مقبول فإن الضعيف الذي فيه يقرب من الحسن. Okay, Imam Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, Imam Ibn Abi Shayba himself, famous Imam Ibn Abi Shayba, he narrates from Abu Muawiyah, from Hajjaj, from Amr ibn Shu'aib, who narrates from his father, from his grandfather being a Sahabi radiyallahu anhu, who said that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that إِذَا الْتَقَى الْخِتَانَانِ, when the two circumcised parts meet, وَتَوَارَتِ الْحَشَفَةِ, and this hadith puts things clear as to what exactly meeting means. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, وَتَوَارَتِ الْحَشَفَةِ. Tawarat means disappear or, move out of sight. So the hashafa refers to the male's organ that when it disappears into the woman, thus the term I used earlier of penetration, that is then Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says faqad wajab al-ghusl, then ghusl immediately becomes obligatory. You may have said, but it just went in and out. It does not matter. The minute it has gone in, the ghusl is broken from both the man and the woman. Imam Ibn Majah rahimahullah reports this hadith, and Maulana Zafar Ahmad Thanvi says that the hadith is also reported by Imam Ahmad rahimahullah in his Musnad, and he narrated with the same chain, and it's mentioned in Kanzul Umal of Imam Muttaqi al-Hindi. He made this statement. He says, وَكُلُّ مَا كَانَ فِي مُسْنَدِ أَحْمَدٍ. Every narration that you find in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, فَهُوَ مَقْبُولٌ. Then it is an accepted narration. فَإِنَّ الضَّعِيفَ الَّذِي فِيهِ يقرب إلى الحسن. يقرب من الحسن. He says, because even the narrations in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, which happen to have some weakness in it, then due to the supporting evidences and the stuff that exists for those narrations, it is these weak and chained ones, so to speak, actually is closer to being Hasan than being weak. So in other words, what he's trying to say is that you can almost say that every single narration in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah is authentic. Now, if you don't know the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, it is the largest collection of hadith by far. You can take Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawud, Nasai, and Ibn Majah and compile all of those ahadith and put it in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, and the Musnad of Imam Ahmad will still have more ahadith. That is how big the collection of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah is. It's the kitab was actually selling on special here in South Africa for 4,500 rand. It could have been 6,500. I can't exactly recall. So it's extremely expensive, and that was still going at a cheap price. The Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah is the Imam of Muhaddithin in where memory is concerned, because he is the only Imam that it is said with regards to him that he had memorized bare minimum of 1 million, but it's also said that he had memorized 3 million ahadith. Imam Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahimahullah, with regards to him, it is said that he memorized 1 million ahadith, but Imam Ahmad, it said 1 or 3 million. Now you may be thinking in your mind, 3 million? Are there so many ahadith? In order to understand this, it's a simple matter. When the term hadith is used by the ulama of hadith, then they refer to the chain of narration. This is hadith as far as they are concerned. Not this part here. This is the matan of the hadith, but for them, this is what they mean. From here, Imam Ibn Abi Shayba tells the Sahabi, this is what they refer to as a hadith. Why? Because, for example, they narrate the same hadith from 5 different people. Wording may be exactly the same, but 5 different chains leading to the same hadith. Thus, it's 5 different hadith. Now, think for a moment. If you are narrating from Imam Ibn Abi Shayba, from Abu Muawiyah, from Hajjaj, from Amr ibn Shu'ayb, from his father, from his grandfather, for example, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say you only have 5 people. Times that by 5, you've got 25 narrators to narrate everyone without making a mistake. Now imagine doing that 3 million times over. Then you ask yourself, who has a memory of that sort? So that is why Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, with that huge amount, obviously his Musnad do not have 3 million ahadith inside it. If that was the case, nobody would have had the time to actually go through that kitab. But the Musnad of Imam Ahmad is the largest collection of hadith that we have extant in one book. For example, you've got Imam al-Bayhaqi rahimahullah in his Sunan al-Kubra, very big. You've got other collections also that are big. But you take, for example, Bukhari, and if you take away the repetitions and things of that sort, then you're sitting with just under 5,000 hadith in the whole of Bukhari. Okay, I should say it's close to 4,000. It's about 4,400 or something of that sort. That's how many are there when you take away the repetitions, because a hadith can come, it's big, so it's got multiple points. So it touches on this point and that point and that point. So Imam Bukhari would put it in different chapters because the hadith relates to all those chapters. So, from that angle. But the point being that it's a massive kitab nonetheless. Okay, so that was the end of that one, and we move on to page 220. Hadith number 165. We've still got a little bit of time, so we can continue. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا جاوز الختان الختان وجب الغسل. رواه الترمذي وقال حديث عائشة رضي الله عنها حسن صحيح. Hazrat Aisha رضي الله عنها narrates that Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم said إذا جاوز الختان الختان. So here a different word is used. Jawaza mean to go beyond. So when the circumcised part of the man goes beyond the circumcised part of the woman, ghusl becomes wajib. In other words, when he enters her. You look at all the various wording that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam used. On every occasion, it was ambiguous type wording. Not ambiguous that the person can't understand it, but ambiguous in the sense that it shies away from using vulgar and crude type speech. So Imam at-Tirmidhi rahimahullah is the narrator of this hadith, and as you can see, it's reported by Imam Ibn Majah above, it was reported by Imam Ahmad rahimahullah above, it was reported by Imam Muslim rahimahullah above. Now you have it from Imam at-Tirmidhi as well. So the hadith is all over the place. So Imam at-Tirmidhi reports this hadith and he says that this narration of Hazrat Aisha radiyallahu anha is hasanun sahih. It is, simply put, when I translate it, I say authentic. If you want to know more from a mustalahul hadith perspective and you want to know specifically what is hasanun sahih in the terminology of Imam at-Tirmidhi, you can go to YouTube, you can type in Ummah Radio channel. You'll find under the Ummah Radio channel a playlist called Mustalahul Hadith series. In that one, go to the very last class in that playlist. It will be the terminology of Imam at-Tirmidhi rahimahullah. I think I did that classes about 6 years or so back on Ummah Radio. So if you wanted to know from that Mustalah al-Hadith perspective what exactly is Hasan and Sahih and why Imam at-Tirmidhi uses such terms, so I mean, you can reference it there because that was a whole class just on that point itself. But anyway, hadith is the same, so let's do one last hadith. Yeah, we can do this one last one before our time runs out, which is hadith number 166 on page 221. أخبرنا الحارث ابن نبهان عن محمد بن عبيد الله عن عمرو بن شعيب عن أبيه عن جده عبد الله رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم سئل ما يوجب الغسل فقال إذا التقى الختانان وغابت الحشفة وجب الغسل أنزل أو لم ينزل. أنزل أو لم ينزل. أخرجه الإمام أبو محمد عبد الله بن وهب في مسنده وفيه الحارث بن نبهان ضعفه الناس من قبل حفظه وكان صالحا. وقال ابن عدي وهو ممن يكتب حديثه كذا في التهذيب. ومحمد بن عبد الله هو العزرمي ضعفه الأكثرون لذهاب كتبه وقد روى عنه شعبة وهو لا يروي إلا عن ثقة كذا في التهذيب. قلت فالحديث حسن لا سيما وله متابع. Lot of discussion on this hadith. It's narrated by Al-Harith ibn Nabhan from Muhammad ibn Ubaidillah from Amr ibn Shu'aib from his father, from his grandfather, radiyallahu anhu, who said Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was asked this question, that what causes ghusl to become farad? And this applies to a man. There's only one thing that breaks his ghusl. For a woman, she's got, like I said, her hayd breaks her ghusl, her nifas also, things of that sort. But for a man, he's only got one and one only thing which breaks ghusl. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam replied by saying, إِذَا الْتَقَى الْخِتَانَانِ, when the two circumcised parts touch, وَغَابَتِ الْحَشَفَةِ. Yeah, we did وَتَوَارَتِ الْحَشَفَةِ earlier. Yeah, غَابَت is the same thing, which means it disappears. And the male organ disappears into the female, then wajib al-ghusl, ghusl becomes wajib. Anzala aw lam yanzil, whether he releases fluid or not, in both cases, both of their ghusl has broken. Imam Abu Muhammad Abdullah ibn Wahab narrates this hadith in his Musnad, and like I was mentioning on one of the Telegram groups, question and answer groups, when somebody asks this question with regards to books of hadith, I mentioned that there are more books of hadith than what the majority of people tend to know. They think there are, 6 books, the 6 famous books of hadith. There are dozens of books of hadith in reality, primary books. I'm not referring to secondary sources like, for example, Riyadus Salihin and books like that. They are taking from Bukhari, Muslim, etc., etc. But there are dozens of primary sources of hadith. People just are not that well clued up where a hadith are concerned. Anyway, so moving on. Uh, it's mentioned in this chain here is Al-Harith ibn Nabhan, which ضعفه الناس من قبل حفظه. A number of muhaddithin have graded him as being weak on account of his memory. وكان صالحا. He was a upright, good person, but he happened to have a weak memory. You know, in reality, most of us today would have been rejected by the muhaddithin, because if I were to narrate a hadith from memory, and you know, you may have heard me in time and again quoting a hadith from memory, but I would be quoting only the matan, you know, إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى. For example, I would quote like that. I not حدثنا you know, Al-Harith ibn Nabhan and Muhammad. I don't quote the whole thing. So if I'm not quoting the whole thing, I wouldn't even be accepted by muhaddithin. That's how serious they were with regards to hadith. But anyway, so Al-Harith ibn Nabhan, many of the muhaddithin graded him as being weak on account of his weak memory. So because he's weak memory, it would mean like he say from Nabhan ibn Harith, or Muhammad ibn Ubaidillah narrates from Al-Harith ibn Nabhan, or Muhammad ibn Abdullah, for example. So he gets the name mixed, or this, yeah, and things. And on account of that, they say, you know, your memory is weak, you narrating from memory. You're not if you have a weak memory and you narrate from a book, no problem. But in his case, he narrated from memory despite having a weak memory. Thus, he's put there as being weak. But he says Imam Ibn Adi. Imam Ibn Adi is one of the muhaddithin. Al-Kamilu fi Du'afa al-Rijal is his most famous book, where it's like the complete book of all the weak narrators that Imam Ibn Adi had regarded as being weak. He listed them in that kitab. But he says that Al-Harith ibn Nabhan وهو ممن يكتب حديثه. He's one of those people whose ahadith will be written down. What does he mean by this? It means that his ahadith are not rejected. He's not some liar or some fabricator or somebody who makes serious mistakes that or some bid'ati whose narrations will be rejected. No, he means that we'll write it down, and you will tend to find that there is some supporting evidences as well. So it goes along from that angle. So his narrations are accepted in that sense. He says this is how it's mentioned in At-Tahdhib, and he says Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who Abdullah or Ubaidillah, he is Al-Azrami. ضعفه الأكثرون. The majority of muhaddithin have graded him as being weak. Why? لذهاب كتبه. Contrary to Al-Harith ibn Nabhan, his story is similar to Abdullah ibn Lahi'a and others of that nature. His case here is the reason the muhaddithin graded him as being weak is because he lost his books. So like I said, you had some muhaddithin who would narrate from memory, and you had a lot of them who used to narrate from their books. So they would go, for example, to Imam Malik and sit in Imam Malik's class and write down a hadith, and they would go, and then, you know, and that's how they would let's put it this way, record and thus be able to transmit a hadith to others by writing it down. And when they would narrate to people, they would keep their book and read from what they had written. So this Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Azrami, he was one of those type of people who had written his hadith down. But after he had lost his books, like in the case of Abdullah ibn Lahi'a, when they started to narrate now from memory, based on what they can remember, they started making mistakes. So because all their life they knew they had weak memories, unable to memorize that amount of texts in a excellent fashion without getting mixed up or anything. So they would always narrate from their books. Now, having lost their books dropped off, fell into the water, ink was washed out, fire came, burned the house out, all the books, things of that sort. So they ended up losing it, and thus from that point they didn't give up on life and lay there and die, but they went now, and people used to still come to them like how they were coming all the time, except now they no longer had their books. So they would narrate now based on what they could remember, and inevitably they would end up making mistakes. And it is on account of those mistakes that muhaddithin would now come in and say, look, in order to preserve the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have to throw a bit of a line here, you know, because we can't trust him 110% that every single word he's telling us is 100% correct. He could have mixed two narrations or things of that sort. So that is why the muhaddithin used to have these sort of gradings, not because they were a bunch of miserable old people who just wanted to find problems with others. Not at all. They wrote these various gradings and stuff for the sake of preserving the Deen and protecting the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to not attribute the word to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that isn't true. That is why this entire science was formed. But anyway, so he says, وَقَدْ رَوَى عَنْهُ شُعْبَةٌ. But despite the fact that the majority of Muhaddithin had graded him as being weak, but he has a plus in his favor, which is that Imam Shu'bah narrates from him. وهو لا يروي إلا عن ثقة. Imam Shu'bah, he has a principle that he does not narrate a hadith from anyone who is not regarded as being reliable. So the fact that Imam Shu'bah narrated from this Imam Muhammad tells, this is not Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, it's Imam Muhammad al-Azrami. So he says the fact that Imam Shu'bah would narrate from him is proof that Imam Shu'bah used to regard him as being reliable. So therefore, he says, قلت فالحديث حسن. Mulana Zafar Ahmad Thanvi, he now comments, he says that, therefore I say that this hadith is actually Hasan. It's not da'if. It's Hasan on account of the fact that it's not just a weak narrator. It's a weak narrator, and you have another muhaddith who graded him as being reliable. So therefore, that alone removes the problem from the narration. But moreover, the cherry on top is that la siyima wa lahu mutabi'. There are supporting evidences for this, and I mean we've done a whole few of them above as well, supporting a hadith. So on account of the fact that you have supporting evidences, that raises it to the level of authenticity. So it goes from being da'if, for example, to use that linguistic term, it goes from being da'if to being hasanun or sahihun li ghayrihi, even because of the various chains of narration that raises it to that level. And that's the end of that narration, and our time is just about run out. So we will stop on this point here, inshallah. We've still got two narrations before we end this chapter, but we will end for tonight, inshallah ta'ala, on this point, and we will resume next week, Thursday, same time, same place, inshallah ta'ala. Monday, like I say, is our tafsir class. Tuesday, our hadith from Riyadh al-Salihin. Wednesday, our Arabic class. And Thursday, our Hanafi fiqh class from hadith. And that's basically our classes for the week. And we will end on this point here, inshallah. Until next time, we end and we say, wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Subhanallahi wa bihamdihi. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.